Do you believe that a mistaken hug at the airport could lead to a destined love? Step into the world of Aria, a regular girl with a guarded heart, and Ethan Carter, a cocky billionaire who can't wield a cooking spoon without setting the kitchen ablaze. From hilarious misunderstandings to moments that melt your heart, this story is like a glass of life's finest wine, bitter, sweet, and impossible to put down. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and you might even wonder, is fate cooking up a surprise for you too? Don't go anywhere, because the journey's just beginning. In the bustling airport, chaotic like a shattered beehive, Aria stood on tiptoe, her eyes shimmering like stars piercing the midnight sky, desperately scanning the sea of restless travelers for a familiar figure. Her brother, the one she had been separated from for months, was finally coming home. Her heart pounded like a war drum inside her chest, so full of excitement she felt it might just leap out of her body and rush to embrace him ahead of her. And then, amidst the swirling mass of bodies, she caught a glimpse, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette, dark hair as sleek as the midnight sky. That had to be him. Without thinking, without a single care for social distancing or personal space, Aria surged forward like a gust of wind, weaving through the crowd with the speed of a seasoned sprinter. "Oh my God, I missed you so much," she cried, her voice thick with emotion as she flung herself into his arms, holding on as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. But then, in what should have been a warm embrace, something felt off. His chest, why was it so firm, so solid, like sculpted granite? And his scent, not the usual mix of sweat and cheap cologne that clung to her brother, but a refined, luxurious fragrance, rich with notes of sandalwood and mystery. A cold wave of dread crashed over her. This hug, meant to be a moment of comfort, was morphing into a waking nightmare. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Slowly, like a frightened kitten, Aria tilted her head upward. And the moment her eyes locked onto the stranger's face, the world around her seemed to freeze. Her stomach dropped, as if she had just plummeted from the 10th floor. This wasn't her brother. This was a complete stranger. No, worse than that. He was a dangerously handsome stranger. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that hugged his chiseled frame like a second skin, he looked like he had just stepped out of a high-fashion magazine. His raven black hair was neatly styled, not a strand out of place. His face, sharp, angular, impossibly flawless, seemed sculpted by the hands of a master artist. And his eyes, God, those eyes. A piercing, stormy gray, deep as the sky before a thunderstorm, locked onto her with a mix of surprise and amusement. Silence hung in the air, so thick she could hear the distant clatter of luggage hitting the floor. Barely half a second had passed, but for Aria, it stretched into eternity. Then, like a bolt of lightning striking her brain, realization hit, and she jerked back so fast she nearly stumbled onto the floor. Oh my God! I hugged the wrong person. I'm so sorry, she blurted, her face blazing red, her hands flailing like a malfunctioning windmill in sheer panic. The man, meanwhile, remained as still as a statue, one brow arched ever so slightly, his expression unreadable, though the faintest flicker of amusement danced in his stormy gaze. If he had spoken, Aria was sure his words would have translated to, "Congratulations, you just made airport history." "Well, that was unexpected," she mumbled, wishing the earth would just open up and swallow her whole. "I thought you were my brother. He's tall, has black hair, and I wasn't looking properly." It was emotional nearsightedness, she blurted out, then instantly regretted it. "Oh God, Aria, shut up." His lips twitched as if suppressing a smirk. "Emotional nearsightedness, is it?" His voice was deep, smooth, tinged with an unmistakable note of amusement. "It's interesting how the heart sometimes outruns the mind. People tend to see what they wish to see, rather than what truly stands before them." Aria swallowed hard. She had just dug her own grave, and now she was shoveling herself deeper into it. Before she could make her escape, a massive figure appeared beside the man, a bodyguard, built like a bear in a sleek black suit, his cold, assessing gaze locking onto her as though she were a security threat. "Mr. Ethan, is everything all right?" The man's deep, rumbling voice sent shivers down her spine. Ethan. The name hit her like a thunderclap. Ethan Carter, the elusive financial titan, the billionaire who thrived in the shadows, a man so wealthy even time itself bowed at his feet. And she, just an ordinary girl with scuffed sneakers, had hurled herself into his arms like a stray cat desperate for affection. "Oh no," she whispered, drowning in a tidal wave of second-hand embarrassment. But instead of irritation, Ethan Carter smiled, a slow, almost teasing curve of his lips. "You look a little nervous," he said, folding his arms, clearly enjoying her mortification. "Are you afraid of billionaires?" Aria blinked, scrambling to regain her composure. "No," she huffed, crossing her arms in defiance. "I'm afraid of airport security footage going viral and turning me into an internet meme." She darted a glance around, paranoia creeping in. Was anyone watching? Recording? Was she about to become the next trending disaster on social media? The thought made her want to scream. "I need to find my brother," she muttered, still flustered. "And maybe change my name. Move to Seattle. Disappear forever." Ethan chuckled, a rich, velvety sound, warm like a crackling fire on a cold night. He didn't say anything more, just watched her with those sharp, unreadable eyes, as if he had no intention of letting her vanish so easily. The next day, Aria stood behind the counter of a small airport cafe, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. A frustrated customer cleared his throat loudly in front of her. "I ordered a cappuccino with no foam, and this," he gestured at the cup with a look of utter disdain, "is full of foam." His tone was so condescending, she nearly rolled her eyes. Instead, she forced a saccharine sweet smile. "Oh, of course. My apologies," she chirped, grabbing the cup and preparing a new one with the enthusiasm of a sleep-deprived zombie. She handed him the corrected order, but he snatched it without so much as a thank you, treating her as if she were invisible. Just another day at work, serving rushed, impatient travelers, the wealthy, the entitled, those who considered a simple thank you too extravagant to spare. The cafe job wasn't her dream, but it kept her afloat in a sea of endless bills. More importantly, it helped her take care of her younger brother, the one person she'd sacrifice anything for. She sighed, rolling the tension from her shoulders, oblivious to the fact that somewhere in the crowd, a pair of stormy gray eyes were watching her closely. Ethan Carter had found her again. And he had no intention of letting this intriguing woman disappear into the crowd so easily. Only a few hours remained until Aria's shift ended. Her feet were already aching in her worn-out shoes, and her mind drifted to the thought of a soft chair and a hot cup of tea waiting for her at home. Suddenly, from across the counter, the familiar gruff voice of Mr. Tyler, the perpetually scowling manager who always looked like he had just smelled burnt coffee, called out her name. "Aria. There's a special order for table 12. Can you take it out for me?" She turned around, hastily adjusting her apron, now stained with coffee splatters, and nodded mechanically. Yes, I'll do it." Balancing the tray in her hands, she maneuvered skillfully through the bustling crowd in the airport cafe, moving with the grace of a ballet dancer caught in a storm of people. Her eyes swept over the sea of unfamiliar faces without lingering. But when she reached table 12, her lips barely parted in greeting before freezing mid-air, as if someone had hit the pause button on her body. The words lodged in her throat, and her heart pounded so hard it felt ready to burst from her chest. Ethan Carter. The impossibly tall and elegant man, whom she had accidentally thrown herself into a hug with just days ago at the airport, was sitting right there. He leaned back in his chair, exuding the effortless confidence of a king on his throne, his stormy gray eyes locked onto hers with a glint of amused mischief. "Well, look at that. We meet again," he said, his deep voice laced with teasing warmth, making Aria wish the ground would swallow her whole. She stood frozen, her mind spinning like an overworked coffee grinder. I mean, she stammered, feeling as though she had been caught doing something terribly wrong. Ethan smirked, lacing his long, elegant fingers together on the table, his composure maddeningly unshaken. And this time, it seems you're the one serving me. Funny how fate works, don't you think? Her cheeks burned as if she had been tossed into an oven. I swear this isn't stalking, she blurted out in a whisper, her voice barely more than a buzzing mosquito, terrified he might think she was some obsessed lunatic. Ethan chuckled, a soft, effortless sound, like a breeze whispering through pine trees. If it were, I wouldn't mind. Aria inhaled sharply, her grip on the tray tightening as it trembled slightly in her hands. What did he just say? Quickly, she placed the cup of coffee in front of him, desperate to mask her flustered state with professionalism. Here's your order. Have a good day. She turned to flee, but his voice stopped her in her tracks, gentle yet firm, like an invisible thread pulling her back. Wait. She hesitated, taking a deep breath as if preparing to jump off a cliff, then reluctantly turned around. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his eyes gleaming under the cafe's dim lighting like rare gemstones. Do you always run away this quickly? Aria blinked, regaining a fraction of her composure. That depends. Do you always show up at the same cafe as the person who accidentally hugged you? His lips curled into a slow smile, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Maybe it's fate. She crossed her arms, arching an eyebrow. Or maybe it's just an airport with limited coffee options. Fair point, Ethan conceded, lifting his cup for a sip, his gaze never wavering from her, as if she were the most fascinating puzzle he had ever encountered. Since we've bumped into each other like this, can I ask you something? She hesitated, feeling like she was walking straight into a carefully laid trap. If I say no, you'll ask anyway, won't you? Ethan shrugged, an innocent expression that was anything but. Aria sighed. Fine. Go ahead. Setting his cup down, he studied her with a curious, playful glint in his eye. That day, did you really mistake me for your brother, or did you just want to hug a random stranger at the airport to brighten their day? Her mouth dropped open in shock, and for a second, she almost dropped the tray. Excuse me. He feigned innocence, lifting a shoulder. You seemed pretty comfortable hugging me. I felt special. Oh my God. Aria rolled her eyes, placing a hand on her hip, struggling to maintain her composure as her face turned as red as a ripe tomato. I swear it was a mistake. I had no idea who you were. Fascinating, Ethan murmured, his voice dipping into something more contemplative, his expression subtly shifting. Why? Aria frowned. Because people usually know who I am. She was quiet for a moment, studying him more closely. There was something about the way he said it, not arrogance, but a hidden weariness, as if his reputation was a heavy coat he had been forced to wear all his life. People usually see your wealth, he continued, his voice as light as a passing breeze. Not that it bothers me. It's just, normal. Aria looked at the man before her, rich, powerful, but for the first time, she saw a small crack in the polished facade. Well, I'm not people, she said firmly, her voice carrying a certainty that surprised even her. Ethan's brows lifted slightly. I've noticed. For a few seconds, they simply held each other's gaze, a quiet understanding settling between them, like an invisible thread connecting two strangers. Ethan was the one to break the silence. So, you work here, right? And before you ask, no, I don't think you're pretending to be a waitress to investigate my secret life. Aria laughed, finally feeling a bit more at ease around him. Good to know. But before she could say anything else, Mr. Tyler's voice rang out again, shattering the rare moment of ease. Aria. Get back to work. She sighed, adjusting her apron. Looks like I have to go. It was an honor serving you today. Hopefully, next time, no accidental hugging. Ethan's smile was warm, like a fire crackling on a cold winter night. I hope so too. The days that followed were a strange mix of routine and anticipation. Since her unexpected encounter with Ethan, Aria had tried to ignore the nagging feeling that her life was about to be turned upside down. But fate, like a skilled director, had a script of its own. That morning, as she tied her apron around her waist and pushed her messy hair back, she took her usual spot behind the counter. Customers flowed in and out, the hum of coffee grinders blending with the chatter. And then, he walked in. Ethan Carter. Striding into the cafe like a mystery waiting to be unraveled, he sat at a table near the counter, eyes locking onto her the moment he entered. A shiver ran down Aria's spine, as if she had just stepped into a storm she hadn't been warned about. No, she muttered under her breath. But it was too late. Ethan raised a hand, deliberately catching her attention with a playful smirk. Waitress, he called, teasing. Aria narrowed her eyes, the urge to ignore him as strong as a tidal wave, but her job pulled her toward him. Grabbing her notepad, she approached with a carefully composed expression. What can I get you today, Mr. Carter? Ethan's smile widened, pleased, like a child winning a game. A cup of coffee. But I want you to make it. She folded her arms. Are you saying the coffee here isn't good enough? Not at all, he replied smoothly. I just want to see if you're as good at making coffee as you are at hugging strangers. Her face flamed, but she refused to let him win so easily. Fine, she said, taking the order and heading to the machine, silently promising to show him exactly what she was capable of. And as the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something far bigger than just another workday. At the end of a long and dragging shift, as the sunset faded outside the airport's glass windows, Aria was diligently wiping the counter, her hands moving swiftly like an artist painting cleanliness onto the chaotic canvas of the day. Suddenly, a cold gust of air brushed against her nape, like a whisper from fate foretelling something imminent. She looked up, her gaze drifting toward the entrance, and, no surprise, Ethan Carter appeared once more, his presence as refined as a living statue stepping out of Greek mythology. She sighed, already accustomed to his periodic teasing, but this time, he didn't take his usual seat near the counter. No, he walked straight to her, his polished leather shoes echoing with a proud click-clack against the stone floor. I need your help with something, he said, his deep voice resonating like a cello in the quiet night. Aria blinked, her mind spinning as if thrown into a labyrinth with no exit. Help? For you? She repeated, as bewildered as if she had just heard the Sphinx's riddle. Ethan smiled, a mischievous glint in his eyes, like sunlight peeking through storm clouds. I want you to have dinner with me tonight. The cloth in Aria's hand nearly slipped to the floor, the imagined sound of it hitting the ground ringing in her head. Dinner? You mean, food, conversation, that kind of thing, she stammered, eyes wide like two lost stars. Exactly, he nodded, leaning slightly toward her, his gaze shimmering as if trying to pull her into another universe. Because I want to know you better. And because you want the same, even if you won't admit it yet. Aria's mouth fell open, then closed, then opened again, like a goldfish gasping for air. You're incredibly arrogant, you know that? She crossed her arms, trying to mask the fluttering sensation in her stomach, like drunken butterflies. I've heard that before, Ethan replied, his voice as light as the breeze. And you think I'll just nod and agree to an invitation like that? Ethan smiled, a mix of tenderness and challenge. You will, because I won't accept no as an answer. Aria raised an eyebrow, feeling like she had just been pulled into a chess match with a grandmaster. Well, that's your misfortune then. But he remained unfazed. Calmly, he picked up a napkin from the counter, pulled a pen from his vest pocket, and scribbled something with the elegant strokes of a calligrapher. This is the address, he said, handing her the note. I'll be waiting at 8 p.m. If you don't show up, I'll assume you're afraid of me. Aria took the note, eyes widening as if she had just received a declaration of war from a general. "Afraid of you?" she echoed, laced with sarcasm. Ethan tilted his head, his gaze sharp as a blade yet warm as a flickering flame. "You don't seem like the type to back down from a challenge." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her standing there, heart pounding like war drums, the note in her hand light as a feather yet heavy as a promise. 7:59 p.m. Aria stood in front of the restaurant Ethan had written on the napkin, her mind overflowing with self-questioning waves. "What am I even doing here?" she muttered, gripping the strap of her purse as if clinging to the last shred of her rationality. This was a bad idea, she knew it, but her feet had led her here anyway, as if swept along by an unstoppable current of fate. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The restaurant unfolded before her, elegant yet understated, refined but intimate, like a hidden gem tucked within the city's heart. Clearly, Ethan had chosen this place to ensure she wouldn't feel overwhelmed by luxury, a small detail, yet enough to catch her off guard. Her eyes scanned the room, and of course, he was there, seated at a reserved table, looking impeccable as always, like a masterpiece painted with deliberate perfection. When their eyes met, a small smile graced his lips, soft as moonlight. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his deep voice carrying a warmth that felt almost like a familiar embrace. Aria sat across from him, arms crossed as if constructing an invisible wall. "I almost didn't," she admitted, half joking, half serious. "Then why did you?" he asked, his eyes glinting with genuine curiosity. She hesitated, then exhaled, leaning slightly to the side as if evading the answer. "Because you provoked me. And I'm not the type to back down from a challenge." Ethan chuckled softly, the sound as light as wind chimes in the twilight. "I figured you'd say that." A waiter arrived, handing them menus. Aria glanced at the prices and nearly choked. "Oh my God, I can't afford this." Ethan didn't even open his menu. He simply looked at her with that infuriatingly calm expression. "I know." She narrowed her eyes, sensing a trap. "You know. And I'm not being tricked into paying, am I? Because if you think I'll accept expensive dinners as some sort of bribe for your attention, you're dead wrong." He smiled slightly, shaking his head as if indulging a stubborn student. "I figured you'd say that too." Aria shut her menu, her voice firm. "Then why am I here, Ethan? What do you want from me?" He was silent for a moment, then leaned forward, his gaze deep as if trying to reach into her soul. "I want to talk. A real conversation, not about money, not about status, just you and me." Aria crossed her arms again, still skeptical, like a hedgehog bristling at a potential threat. "This is ridiculous. You have thousands of people around you, people richer, more powerful than me. Why do you care about me?" Ethan studied her, like an artist admiring his favorite painting. "Because you're different," he said, his tone resolute. Aria blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Different?" He nodded, a spark of mischief mixed with sincerity in his eyes. "From the moment you accidentally hugged me, you didn't care who I was. You treated me like a stranger." She let out a dry laugh. "Because I thought you were my brother." "Exactly," Ethan smiled, tilting his head as if marveling at a rare discovery. "And even after realizing who I was, you remained yourself. You didn't try to impress me or flatter me for money or status. You treated me like an ordinary man. That's so rare, I can't even remember the last time it happened." Something warm flickered in Aria's chest, like a gentle breeze slipping through the cracks of an otherwise cold space. He was telling the truth. And his honesty unsettled her. "So, you want my friendship?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if testing the waters. Ethan looked at her, his eyes glimmering like stars against a midnight sky. "Let's start with that." Aria sighed, picking up the menu again, the corners of her lips curling slightly. "Fine. But I'm choosing the food. That's only fair." The dinner unfolded unexpectedly smoothly, like a melody flowing effortlessly through the air. Aria had braced herself for arrogance, for a display of wealth, or even sheer boredom from a man accustomed to luxury. But Ethan was none of those things. He listened, truly listened, as if every word she spoke was a rare gem. He asked thoughtful questions, shared childhood stories, like the time he climbed a tree and fell flat on his face in front of the whole village, or his travels around the world, but without the air of superiority, just like a friend reminiscing by a fireside. And for the first time in a long while, Aria laughed, not the polite chuckle of a waitress, but a real, unguarded laugh straight from her heart. As the restaurant lights flickered, signaling closing time, she realized something. Ethan wasn't just a mysterious billionaire or a man who looked like he stepped out of a magazine. He was a lonely soul, searching for a genuine connection in a world full of illusions. And she, whether she liked it or not, was being drawn into the strange whirlwind that was Ethan Carter. A storm that just might change her sky forever. When dinner ended, Ethan paid the bill with effortless grace, like a passing breeze leaving no trace of arrogance. They stepped out of the restaurant into the cool night air, where a gentle wind played with Aria's hair like autumn's whisper. She crossed her arms, feeling the crisp chill seep through her thin blouse, her gaze absent-mindedly following the twinkling streetlights, scattered like fallen stars on earth. Ethan glanced at her, his sharp eyes softening for a moment before he did something that stunned her. He took off his elegant blazer and draped it over her shoulders with the effortless charm of a gentleman from a classic novel. Aria blinked, so surprised she nearly jumped. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing him suspiciously, her tone that of a detective uncovering a dubious clue. "I don't want you to be cold," Ethan replied, his voice warm and rich, like aged wine. She narrowed her eyes, gripping the edge of his jacket as his deep, woody cologne enveloped her, leaving her slightly flustered. "This isn't some attempt to bribe me, is it?" Ethan chuckled, the sound like a soft bell ringing in the quiet night. "If I wanted to bribe you, you'd know. I'd bring a truckload of red roses and an entire symphony orchestra, not just a jacket." Aria rolled her eyes, but the slight curve at the corner of her lips betrayed her. She couldn't deny the warmth of the jacket, or the unspoken comfort that settled between them. They stood there in a rare moment of ease, watching the quiet street stretch before them, a canvas painted with light and shadow. Then Ethan spoke, his voice as gentle as the wind rustling through the trees. "I like this." Aria turned to him, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Like what?" For the first time, the teasing and challenge were absent from his gaze. Instead, there was a quiet sincerity, deep as the ocean. "I like spending time with you." Aria's heart skipped a beat, like a leaf falling onto still water, sending ripples through her chest. That wasn't good. No matter how much she tried to deny it, deep down, she liked it too, the way he made her laugh, the way he made her feel flustered, the way he made her feel special in a world that often felt too chaotic. But she quickly turned away, masking the storm inside her with an air of indifference. In the days that followed, Aria clung to her routine like a sailor gripping the wheel in a storm. She told herself nothing had changed, that an unusual yet warm dinner with a reclusive billionaire wasn't a defining moment in her life. But ignoring Ethan Carter turned out to be impossible. He kept appearing, as predictable as the sunrise, at the cafe, sitting at the same table near the counter, ordering the same black coffee, and, of course, insisting that only she serve him. He was doing it on purpose, Aria knew that, but she couldn't stop herself from responding with playful jabs, half serious, half teasing. That morning, she arrived at work with her mind elsewhere. Her younger brother, Samuel, had been complaining of persistent pain for days, and an ominous cloud of worry loomed over her. Samuel had always been strong, like a wild Mustang on the open plains, yet something was wrong, an unsettling feeling tightened around her heart. She promised herself she'd take him to the doctor the moment her shift ended. But for now, she had to focus. And, as expected, Ethan was there, looking effortlessly composed, as if he owned the world around him. She took his order and walked to his table, keeping her tone light but laced with sarcasm. "Do you really not have anywhere else to get coffee?" Ethan smiled, taking the cup she placed in front of him, his eyes glinting like sunlight on water. "I have plenty of options, but I like it here." "I doubt that," she replied, folding her arms. "And I like your company," he added, his voice so genuine that it almost made her step back. "You never give up, do you?" She narrowed her eyes, trying to hold her ground. "Not at all," he said, taking a slow sip of coffee, his gaze never leaving hers. "What do you get out of this?" Ethan set down his cup, his expression contemplative, as if seeing through the walls she had built around herself. "I already told you. I enjoy talking to you. It's refreshing." Aria rolled her eyes, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "You make it sound like I'm a summer breeze or something." "Maybe you are," he said, his smile warm as the first light of dawn. She didn't want to smile back. But she did. That night, after work, Aria rushed to get Samuel, her feet moving swiftly as if carried by the wind, her chest heavy with anxiety. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctor saw him immediately. Then everything changed in an instant. "Your brother has kidney disease," the doctor said, his voice steady yet serious as he reviewed the test results. "He'll need ongoing treatment, and possibly a major surgery." Aria felt the ground disappear beneath her, as if she had fallen into a bottomless void. "But he's always been healthy," she whispered, her voice as fragile as a dried leaf in the wind. "These things happen," the doctor said with a sympathetic look. "But if treated in time, he has a good chance of full recovery." "How much will it cost?" she asked, dreading the answer before it came. When the doctor named the price, her stomach dropped like a heavy stone sinking into deep water. She didn't have that kind of money, not even close. Beside her, Samuel noticed her expression and reached for her hand, his grip small but warm. "Aria, don't worry. Everything will be okay." She blinked away the sting of tears, forcing a shaky smile. "Yeah. It'll be okay." But in her heart, she had no idea how she was going to make it through. The next day, Aria arrived at the cafe exhausted, dark circles under her eyes like crescent moons after a sleepless night. And, of course, Ethan noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked, his voice gentle yet firm as she set his coffee down. "Nothing," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Aria." His voice was softer now, but insistent. "Tell me." She hesitated, gripping the tray tightly, as if it was the only thing holding her together. Then, for the first time, she let her guard down. She told him about Samuel, about the diagnosis, about the crushing weight of a medical bill she couldn't afford. Ethan listened in silence, his gray eyes deep and unwavering. When she finished, he placed his cup down and spoke with quiet certainty. "I'll pay for the treatment." Aria froze, as if winter had suddenly descended upon her. "What?" "I'll pay," he repeated. "No debts, no favors. Just because I can, and because I want to help." She shot to her feet so fast that her chair nearly tipped over. "No." Ethan frowned, clearly taken aback by her reaction. "Aria. I don't take money from people," she cut him off, her voice shaking with pride and desperation. "I'm not a charity case." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady like a lighthouse in a storm. "This isn't charity. It's a gesture." "I don't want your gesture," she snapped, turning to leave. But he caught her wrist, gentle, yet firm. "Then let's make a deal." She hesitated, turning back to him. "What kind of deal?" He slowly released her wrist, his eyes gleaming with an idea. "You cook for me for a week. 3 meals a day. At my place." Aria's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. "You want me to cook for you?" He nodded, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. 7 days, 3 meals a day. She stared at him, processing the absurdity of the proposal. "That's a weird deal." "Think what you want," he said, smirking slightly. "But that's my offer." She hesitated, torn between her pride and the love she had for Samuel, the brother she would do anything to protect. She swallowed hard, clenched her fists, and then said the only thing she could. "Fine." When she agreed, she had no idea what she was walking into. She thought it would be simple, just cooking meals for a week. Easy, right? But with Ethan Carter, nothing was ever simple. And she was about to find that out in the most unexpected way. The next day, when Aria arrived at the address Ethan had given her, she nearly stumbled backward, thinking she had come to the wrong place. In front of her wasn't just any ordinary house, but a towering modern skyscraper, reaching for the stars, secured with layers of tight security and an entrance made of soaring glass doors that shimmered like mirrors reflecting the sky. The doorman, an elderly man with a stern demeanor, dressed in a rigid uniform, eyed her from head to toe with suspicion, as if she were a stray bird that had mistakenly flown into an eagle's nest. But the moment she hesitantly uttered the name Ethan Carter, his demeanor changed in an instant, from cold indifference to respectful deference, before personally escorting her to a private elevator, gleaming as if polished daily. As the elevator doors slid open, Aria stood frozen, mouth slightly agape, as if stepping into a dream. Ethan's apartment was breathtakingly vast, the kind of space she had only ever seen gracing the covers of luxury magazines she occasionally admired in the old bookstore. Minimalist yet sophisticated, its floor-to-ceiling glass walls unveiled a stunning panorama. The city stretched beneath her feet like a dazzling tapestry of lights, twinkling like a fallen Milky Way. And there, like a king in his kingdom, sat Ethan, reclining in a sleek black leather armchair, a coffee cup in hand, his expression composed as if this were just another ordinary morning. "Welcome," he greeted, his deep voice smooth as a soothing melody. Aria crossed her arms, trying to maintain her composure despite the turmoil swirling inside her. "All right, this is ridiculous." Ethan raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering in his gaze. "What is?" She gestured around the apartment, her voice laced with disbelief. "This apartment. This view. Everything. It looks so expensive I'm afraid even breathing might damage something." Ethan chuckled, a smile as gentle as sunlight filtering through leaves. "What were you expecting?" "I don't know, a normal place," she huffed, her voice a little higher than intended. "Not some floating mansion in the sky." He shrugged with an infuriating nonchalance. "If you prefer, we can eat in the kitchen." Aria closed her eyes, inhaling deeply as if trying to suppress the storm of emotions within her. "Forget it. Where do I cook?" Ethan pointed toward a door, and as she followed his direction, she nearly let out a scream of disbelief. The kitchen looked like a stage for a high-end culinary show she had once sneakily watched on an old TV, everything gleamed as if plated with silver, the massive gas stove resembled a futuristic machine, the sleek cabinets reflected the light, and even the spoons radiated an air of opulence. She turned to him, eyes wide. "I refuse to believe you've ever used this kitchen." Ethan smirked, mischief twinkling in his eyes. "Of course, I have. I've walked through it a few times." "Fantastic," Aria rolled her eyes, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I work in a tiny cafe, and now I'm supposed to cook in a 5-star restaurant. You really think I can handle this?" He tilted his head, teasing. "You accepted the challenge, didn't you? But if you turn into a difficult customer, I might throw a pan at you." Aria pointed a finger at him, mock-threatening. "Watch yourself, Ethan Carter. Watch yourself." The first few days felt surreal, as if she had walked into a play where she didn't know her lines. Aria would wake up early, still groggy, dragging herself to Ethan's apartment to prepare breakfast in the lavish kitchen, alone, while he worked in another room, probably signing deals worth a fortune, she guessed. Then she'd cook lunch, leave it on the table with a small note, and finally dinner, where he always appeared right on time, as punctual as a Swiss watch. Surprise me, he would say each day, his half-smile both infuriating and oddly charming. And much to her dismay, Aria found herself starting to enjoy the challenge, enjoying the chance to experiment with premium ingredients, enjoying the quiet solitude of the apartment, an oasis amid the chaos of life. But the strangest part was how Ethan began spending more time in the kitchen. At first, he would silently fetch a cup of coffee, leaning against the counter with an air of deliberate indifference. Then he started sitting down, his gray eyes watching her chop vegetables, stir sauces, like an intrigued spectator mesmerized by a culinary ballet. And eventually, they started talking, real conversations. One evening, as she was chopping onions, her eyes stinging, he asked, his tone casual as if discussing the weather, "Why did you choose to be a waitress?" Aria let out a dry laugh, her knife pausing midair. "I didn't choose it. I needed a job, and it happened to be there." "What would you do if you had a choice?" he pressed, his gaze deep, as if trying to see beyond her carefully built walls. She hesitated, her hands tightening around the knife, her eyes drifting as if lost in an unreachable dream. "I don't know. Something I love. But not everyone has the luxury of choosing, you know." Ethan was silent for a moment before speaking, his voice low, like waves crashing against a rocky shore. "What if I do?" She looked up, surprised. "Why do you care?" He smiled faintly, a sad kind of smile, like the moon peeking through heavy clouds. "Because I have everything money can buy, but I've never had the freedom to choose what I truly want." Aria stared at him, for the first time seeing a crack in Ethan Carter's perfect facade. He wasn't just a powerful billionaire, he was a soul trapped in the golden cage of his own kingdom, just like she was caught in the endless cycle of responsibilities and bills. And in that fleeting moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink, like two lost ships finding each other in the vast ocean. On the fifth day, Ethan did something that nearly made her drop her knife. While she was slicing carrots with precise strokes, she noticed a dress placed on the kitchen counter, silk flowing like liquid, deep blue like the night sky. She stared at it, then turned to him, who leaned against the counter with that infuriatingly calm expression. "What is this?" she asked, suspicious. "A dress, obviously," he replied, his lips curving. "But why?" "There's a charity event tomorrow night," he said, his eyes gleaming. "I want you to come with me." Aria froze, as if winter had suddenly settled into her bones. "Go with you? Are you out of your mind?" Ethan smiled, a mix of gentleness and challenge in his gaze. "Maybe. It'll be fun." She picked up the dress, her hands trembling as if she were holding a treasure that didn't belong to her. "I can't go. I don't belong in your world, Ethan." He leaned in, his gaze unwavering like a lighthouse in a storm. "And why not?" A knot tightened in her stomach, pulling her into a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't escape. This man was dangerous, not in a literal sense, but in the way he made her question things she had always accepted as unchangeable. And in that moment, she realized she wanted to go, not just for the event, but because she was curious to see Ethan in his world and, perhaps, to see if she could step into it without losing herself. But admitting that also meant acknowledging that Ethan Carter was beginning to stir something within her, and that was a problem. The next night, Aria sat in Ethan's luxurious car on the way to the event. The dress fit her perfectly, as if it had been tailored for her, making her feel both confident and unfamiliar. When she had stepped out of her room earlier, Ethan had paused, his eyes widening as if witnessing a rare wonder. "What?" she asked, nervous. "Nothing," he blinked, regaining composure. "You just look beautiful." Her heart pounded like a drum, warmth spreading through her chest. "Do you say that to everyone?" she teased, trying to mask her flustered state. "No," he replied, his smile soft as moonlight. "Just to you." She didn't know how to respond, so she pretended not to hear, staring out the window, her mind swirling with silent questions. Where would this night lead her? And why was she letting Ethan Carter pull her into this unfamiliar wind, a wind that could change her sky forever. As they stepped into the event, the dazzling chandelier lights cascaded down like crystal droplets falling from heaven, and every gaze in the opulent room simultaneously turned to Aria. She felt like a small fish lost in an ocean of arrogant sharks, guests dressed in luxurious designer outfits, shimmering like stars in the night sky. Women with meticulously styled curls and bold red lips stared at her, their piercing gazes like invisible arrows, as if she were a misplaced piece in their perfect picture. She crossed her arms, trying to stand tall, but inside, she was a storm of turmoil. And then, like the final dagger to her wavering self-esteem, Abigail appeared, Ethan's ex-girlfriend. Tall and slender like a proud oak, her golden hair gleamed like summer sunlight, exuding an elegance that commanded reverence. Her eyes swept over Aria from head to toe, and her lips curled into a smirk, sharp, cutting, and laced with disdain. "Ethan, what a surprise to see you here. And with such an interesting companion." A surge of anger flared in Aria's chest, hot and searing, ready to consume everything. But before she could retort with the sarcastic remark she had prepared in her mind, Ethan gently intertwined his warm fingers with hers, a gesture both tender and resolute, an unspoken declaration. "She's not my companion," he said, his deep voice calm as a still lake, yet carrying the quiet strength of a mountain. "She's my guest. And if you have a problem with that, Abigail, perhaps you should find another corner to sit in." Aria froze, not because of his words, but because of the way he stood up for her. Like a knight in a sleek black suit, unwavering, unshaken. Something inside her stirred, like a single leaf drifting onto the surface of a pond. And for the first time, she allowed herself to admit, she liked him, more than she had ever dared to acknowledge, like an unexpected wind slipping through the cracks of her long-frozen heart. The warmth of Ethan's hand still lingered, an invisible thread linking two unfamiliar souls. His sharp reply to Abigail echoed in her mind, along with the flicker of surprise and hurt in Abigail's eyes and the curious glances from the surrounding crowd. Why did that move her so much? Why did Ethan care about protecting her, someone he had only met through a humorous, accidental embrace? They barely knew each other. Or maybe, just maybe, he saw her through a different lens, one she had never dared to confront herself. "Come on, let's get a drink," he murmured, releasing her hand but remaining close, like an unwavering shield between her and the judgmental stares. Aria nodded, trying to ignore the feeling of being an outsider in this world of luxury, a world she had never imagined herself stepping into, and, to be honest, wasn't sure she wanted to stay in. But when she looked at him, at his deep gray eyes watching her intently as if ensuring she was okay, she felt an unfamiliar warmth seeping into her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, she wanted to be by his side, even if it turned out to be a terrible mistake. The next day, Aria's name flooded every news outlet like an unexpected storm washing away the peace in her life. She didn't need to check her phone. The moment she stepped into the cafe for her shift, her coworkers' expressions said it all, ranging from sheer disbelief to bitter jealousy, to cold judgment that pierced like needles against her skin. "Aria, did you really attend the event with Ethan Carter? Where did you get that stunning dress? Did he buy it for you? Did you know? Abigail posted about you on Instagram." The questions poured in like a summer downpour, making her want to evaporate into thin air. But curiosity, or perhaps a masochistic tendency, won. With trembling fingers, she opened social media, and immediately, a photo of her standing next to Ethan flashed on the screen, followed by an avalanche of cutting comments. Who is she? No one is good enough for Ethan. Another gold digger, obviously. He'll drop her in a few days. Aria's stomach twisted, as if an invisible force was squeezing it mercilessly. She never wanted this, the artificial spotlight, the scrutinizing stares, or the venomous whispers slicing through her like icy wind. Now, she stood at the eye of the storm, her eyes burning as if on the verge of tears. She shoved her phone into her apron pocket, trying to block out the hushed laughter and murmurs around her. But her patience, already fragile as a thread, was wearing thinner by the second. By the end of the day, Ethan walked into the cafe, moving with the effortless confidence of a king among commoners, his expression serene, as if gossip and slander were nothing more than passing breezes. He was used to being judged, scrutinized, and talked about since he was young. But she wasn't. And in that moment, the anger inside her ignited like dry grass catching fire, unstoppable and fierce. As he approached the counter, she leaned forward, her eyes burning like embers, her voice trembling with restraint. "There are rumors, and we need to talk." Ethan raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his gaze. "Are you okay?" But when he saw the serious set of her expression, he nodded, his voice dropping lower. "All right. Let's find somewhere quieter." 10 minutes later, they stood in a secluded corner of a nearby park, golden leaves scattering at their feet like shattered memories. Aria didn't waste time, her voice as sharp as a freshly sharpened blade. "Do you even know what you've done?" Ethan tilted his head, waiting with that infuriating calmness. "I protected you." "No," she snapped, almost shouting, her fists clenched. "You threw me into your world, a world I never wanted to be a part of." Ethan was silent for a moment, then sighed, a quiet sound, like the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. "Is that what really bothers you? Or is it what people are saying?" Aria shut her eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to suppress the storm of emotions surging inside her. "I don't want to be a scandal. I don't want my name plastered on headlines. I just want my normal life, the life I know, the life I can control." He watched her, his gray eyes as deep and steady as a still lake before a storm, as if he were reading the fears she was too afraid to voice. And then, he said something that made her breath hitch, like a splash of cold water in the middle of winter. "But you never truly wanted a normal life, Aria." She blinked, stunned, as if she had just been pulled out of a dream. "What?" "You've always wanted more," he continued, his voice low but resolute, a truth she couldn't escape. "You've always had big dreams, always craved something beyond what you were given, beyond this cafe counter, beyond the monotony of your daily routine. But now, just because a few people are talking, you're scared. You're curling up like a frightened bird in a storm." Her throat tightened, as if a stone was lodged there, stopping her from breathing. Because deep down, he was right. He saw through her, more clearly than she had ever allowed herself to. And then, Ethan made the biggest mistake of the night. He reached out, intending to touch her shoulder in comfort. But Aria flinched, recoiling instinctively, as if from a dangerous flame. It was just a reflex. But it was enough. His eyes darkened for the briefest moment, a flicker of hurt visible, like a tiny crack in the fortress he had built around himself. She swallowed hard, her voice hoarse with emotion. "I need to go." Before he could say another word, she turned and walked away, her legs trembling, her heart pounding. She left behind an invisible void, something fragile as a broken thread, yet heavy as a sky full of impending storm clouds. Aria descended the stairs of Ethan's luxurious building, her footsteps heavy as if carrying the weight of a world filled with pain and anger. She didn't look back, not even once, fearing that a single glance would shatter her resolve, sending tears streaming down like a broken dam. Her eyes burned, stinging as if licked by flames, but she bit her lip hard, refusing to let a single tear fall, not for him, not now. Rage and sorrow tore through her, as though her heart had been ripped apart. She had been foolish to trust him, to allow fragile seeds of hope to take root between them. And he, Ethan Carter, had known all along. He knew his company was the one that had seized her family's restaurant, the place that had been the heart of her childhood, built from her parents' sweat and sacrifice. Yet he had said nothing, letting her walk blindly into the emotional trap he had laid. What else had he hidden? The trust that had just begun to blossom between them, delicate as a morning petal, shattered in an instant, like glass crashing to the ground, breaking into 100 irreparable shards. She hailed a taxi, her trembling fingers clutching her purse tightly. When she finally stepped into the small apartment she shared with Samuel, she fought to keep herself from collapsing. Samuel, her beloved younger brother, lay sprawled on their worn-out armchair, his eyes glued to a dull comedy show on TV. "Are you okay?" he asked, frowning as he noticed her pale face. Aria forced a smile, a distorted, fragile thing. "Of course. Just tired." But Samuel wasn't easily fooled. His sharp gaze studied her, as if seeing straight through the mask she wore. "Are you sure? You've never come home looking like you lost the whole world before." She took a deep breath, pushing the storm of emotions deep inside her, like dropping a heavy stone into a bottomless well. "I'm fine. Really? Are you hungry?" He nodded, but she knew he was still watching her, his expression cautious, like a hound catching the scent of something amiss. She didn't want him to know. Samuel had enough burdens with his own illness, and the last thing he needed was to worry about his sister's crumbling life. The days that followed passed in a strange, colorless haze, as though she were living inside a painting drained of its vibrance. Ethan had disappeared completely, no sign of him at the cafe, no messages, nothing to prove he had ever been a part of her world. Aria told herself this was good, that she should be glad to be free from his deception and lies. But every time she walked into the cafe, her eyes instinctively flickered to the empty table where he used to sit, where he had once smiled at her with eyes that sparkled like autumn skies. And each time, a sharp pain twisted in her chest, like an invisible needle piercing her heart. She shouldn't care. He had betrayed her. He had broken her trust. So why did she miss him so much? Why did she long for his teasing remarks, the way he listened to her like she was the only person in the world? She threw herself into work, making coffee, wiping tables, serving customers with a forced smile, filling her mind with mundane tasks to drown out the ache inside her. But deep down, she knew something had broken. A piece of her soul had gone missing, and she had no idea how to find it again, nor whether it was even worth repairing. 1 week later, as the pale hues of sunset faded through the cafe's windows, Aria locked up for the night, her hands aching from the long shift. Footsteps sounded behind her, soft but deliberate. She stiffened. "We're closed," she said curtly, not bothering to turn around, assuming it was a late customer begging for one last cup of coffee. "I know," the voice replied, low and hoarse, like a sorrowful melody. "But I need to talk to you." Her heart stopped. She knew that voice, too well, too intimately. Slowly, she turned, as if afraid that moving too fast would shatter the fragile defenses she had built around her heart. And there he was, Ethan. Standing under the dim glow of the street lamp, but he wasn't the same. The confidence he always carried, the gleam in his gray eyes, was gone. Instead, there was exhaustion, a heavy weight pressing down on his shoulders, as if he had just walked through a storm and barely made it out. "Please," he murmured, his voice rough with desperation. "Just hear me out." Aria folded her arms, an icy shield forming around her. "Hear what, Ethan? That you knew all along. That you got close to me out of guilt." He closed his eyes for a brief second, as if gathering strength, then shook his head. "That's not true." "Then explain," she nearly shouted, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and heartbreak. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze locked onto hers, raw and unguarded. "I didn't know about your family's restaurant until a few days ago. I don't handle every transaction my company makes, Aria. When I found out, I was just as shocked as you." She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to his words like a lifeline in the sea of doubt. But her trust had been shattered, how could she rebuild it? "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her voice as cold as ice, though her heart screamed for a reason to hold on. Ethan hesitated, then spoke, his voice solemn as if making an oath in the darkness. "Because I never lied about how I feel about you." She held her breath, trapped in the storm of emotions swirling inside her. She didn't want to hear that. She didn't want her heart to tremble at his words. But God, she wanted it to be true. She wanted it more than anything. Ethan stepped closer, just a small step, but enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I never wanted you to hate me, Aria," he whispered. "But if that's the price I have to pay to tell you the truth, then I'll accept it." She stood frozen, torn between logic and longing, like two opposing waves crashing into each other. Before she could find the words to respond, he placed an envelope on the counter, his gaze filled with a mix of pain and hope. "This is for you." "What is it?" she asked warily. He didn't answer. He simply looked at her one last time, a deep, lingering gaze, as if trying to memorize her face, before turning and walking away, leaving her standing there with a heart in turmoil. With shaky hands, Aria opened the envelope. Inside was a contract. A deed transfer. Her family's restaurant, her childhood home, the place where her father once laughed behind the kitchen, where her mother wiped tables with calloused hands. Ethan had bought it back. And now, it belonged to her. Her knees nearly buckled as her mind reeled, caught in a whirlwind of disbelief. Her restaurant. Hers again. Like an old dream rising from the ashes. She sank into a chair, clutching the papers as the tears finally spilled over, not from pain, but from a mix of shock, gratitude, and something nameless that stirred in her chest for the man who had just walked away. He had done this for her. But was it enough to mend what had been broken between them? She didn't know. But in that moment, she felt a glimmer of light piercing through the darkness. A light called hope. Ethan returned the restaurant without asking for anything in return, and in that moment, Aria realized a truth as deep as the ocean's depths: he was trying to mend the cracks of the past, not just his, but hers as well. That night, she lay restless on the small bed in her cramped apartment, her weary eyes fixed on the contract on the table. The words danced under the dim yellow light, tempting her like a siren's call. She was overwhelmed, her heart flooded with mixed emotions, astonishment, gratitude, and a lingering ache for all that had been lost. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she knew what she had to do. As the first light of dawn bathed the silent streets in gold, she stood before Ethan's apartment door, her heart pounding like a war drum, her trembling hand pressing the doorbell. When Ethan opened the door, his face registered a flicker of surprise, his gray eyes widening as if struggling to believe the sight before him. Aria didn't give him a chance to speak. She stepped inside with determined strides, her gaze locked onto his like an arrow finding its mark. And then, in a moment that even she didn't anticipate, she threw herself into his arms. Ethan froze for a split second, like a statue trapped in time, then slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. His warmth spread through her like fire on a winter's night. Aria closed her eyes, breathing in the faint scent of sandalwood that clung to him, a scent so familiar she hadn't realized how much she had missed it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rustling of leaves, yet carrying the weight of an ocean's worth of emotions. Ethan pulled her even closer, his voice steady, a quiet promise. "I just wanted you to have back what was always yours." She pulled away slightly, looking up at him, her eyes shimmering with unspoken questions. "Does this change everything?" Ethan was silent for a moment, as if weighing the entire world in his hands. Then, a small smile curved his lips, gentle as the full moon's glow. "It only changes everything if you want it to." Aria's heart pounded faster, like a bird finally freed from its cage. And when Ethan slowly leaned in, his breath ghosting over her lips, close enough that she could feel the rhythm of his heartbeat, she didn't pull away. For the first time, she wanted this, wanted him, and there was nothing left to deny. They stood there, in the hushed space of his luxurious apartment, two lost souls who had finally found their way home. Aria had never imagined that her life could turn upside down so quickly in such a short time. She had spent years struggling, juggling overdue bills, exhausting shifts at the cafe, and the responsibility of taking care of Samuel, the younger brother she loved more than herself. Dreams? They had always been distant clouds she never dared to reach for, fleeting birds she only watched from the ground. But now, as she held the restaurant contract in her hands, the gift Ethan had given her like some kind of miracle, she felt a fresh wind sweep through her soul. It wasn't just a stack of papers, it was a doorway to the future, a whisper from the past telling her she could reclaim what was lost. She stood at a crossroads. One path led to accepting this gift, rebuilding her family's restaurant, the place once filled with the aroma of her mother's freshly baked bread, the place where her father's corny jokes made customers laugh, and leaving Ethan behind as nothing more than a beautiful but distant memory. The other path meant facing the truth of what was in her heart, the emotions she had tried to bury but still burned beneath the ashes. Because no matter how many times she denied it, Ethan Carter had touched her in a way no one else ever had. He challenged her, made her so furious she wanted to throw a frying pan at his face, yet he also made her laugh with his ridiculous teasing and warmed her with the golden light in his eyes. He wasn't perfect, far from the noble hero of a novel, but he was willing to change for her. And that terrified her more than unpaid bills or sleepless nights. She needed time, to think, to sort through the mess of emotions like a disorganized bookshelf. So, she did what she always did when overwhelmed. She went home, held Samuel tightly, and pretended that her life was still a straight, predictable line instead of a winding, unpredictable road. But the universe, like a mischievous director, never let her rest for long. That night, when darkness blanketed the apartment, the shrill ring of her phone cut through the silence like a siren's wail. Her heart clenched. She glanced at the screen, hospital. Her hands shook as she answered. The doctor's voice came through, urgent and serious, a sharp alarm bell in the night. Samuel's condition has worsened. You need to come immediately. Aria felt her legs turn to mist, so weak she nearly collapsed. Grabbing her bag, she ran out the door in a panic, trembling so hard she barely noticed. Fear gripped her like an icy hand around her throat. She made it to the hospital in record time, sprinting down the sterile white halls as if she were racing against death itself. She found the doctor who had called, his expression grave under the fluorescent lights. He explained that Samuel had suffered a sudden critical turn, his kidney condition had deteriorated severely. Without immediate surgery, he would be in real danger. Aria collapsed onto the chair, burying her face in her hands, tears spilling uncontrollably. She couldn't lose Samuel. He was her family, the only light in her darkest days, the reason she still smiled despite life's cruelty. But the surgery was expensive, so expensive that everything she had saved her entire life was nothing but a grain of sand in the desert. Desperation swallowed her whole, leaving no space for pride or planning. And then, amid the chaos in her mind, one name surfaced, Ethan. Her hands trembled as she dialed his number, no hesitation this time. He picked up on the second ring, his voice already laced with concern, as if he could feel the storm inside her. Aria? She tried to speak, but the words choked in her throat. Her breath was shaky, fragile. Samuel, he needs surgery. I don't have enough money. Silence. A beat. Then, Ethan's voice, steady and unwavering, like a lighthouse guiding her through a storm. I'm on my way to the hospital right now. And he was. When he arrived, still in his crisp dress shirt but with a hastily thrown-on coat, his gray eyes burning with fierce determination, Aria felt a warmth spread through her frozen fear. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Ethan didn't hesitate. He spoke to the doctors, signed the necessary papers with the efficiency of someone used to handling crises, ensuring that Samuel would receive the best care possible. Aria wanted to protest, to scream that she didn't need his money, that she didn't want to owe him anything. But right now, Samuel's life was all that mattered. And she couldn't let her pride stand in the way. The surgery lasted for hours, each minute stretching endlessly. Aria sat in the waiting room, unable to stay still, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Ethan stayed beside her the entire time, not saying much, just holding her hand when she needed something solid to cling to, respecting her silence when words felt useless. Finally, the doctor emerged, looking exhausted but hopeful. The surgery was successful. Relief crashed over Aria like a tidal wave. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nearly collapsed under the weight of it all. And then, for the first time, she let herself embrace Ethan without fear or hesitation. This wasn't a hug of desperation, nor a clumsy, mistaken embrace like the one at the airport. This was something deeper, an embrace filled with gratitude, with something unspoken yet undeniable. A beginning of something neither of them could ignore anymore. "Thank you," Aria's voice choked, like a small stream blocked by the stones of emotion. Ethan held her tighter, his strong arms wrapped around her like an unyielding fortress, offering a sense of security she never realized she needed so desperately. She didn't know what this moment meant, whether it was a beginning or just a pause in the chaotic symphony of life, but she was certain of one thing: from now on, nothing would ever be the same. In the days that followed, Samuel recovered slowly, like a young sapling stretching after a storm, and Aria stayed by his side every minute, every second. Her eyes were weary, yet they lit up with hope every time he smiled. Ethan, a silent companion, continued to take care of everything, from hospital paperwork to calls with doctors, never expecting gratitude or repayment. He never mentioned money, never made her feel indebted to him, and it was this selflessness that unsettled her, like a lost traveler stumbling upon an oasis in the desert. For the first time, she realized Ethan Carter was not the man she had always thought, a conceited figure thriving in a world of luxury. Perhaps, he had never been that man at all. One evening, after Samuel had drifted into a peaceful sleep in his hospital room, Aria stepped outside to breathe in the crisp night air. She curled up on a bench in the hospital's small garden, hugging her knees to her chest like a child seeking comfort. The night sky was clear, the stars scattered like diamonds across an endless black canvas. She gazed upward, letting her thoughts drift aimlessly. Soft footsteps echoed nearby, and she lifted her head to see Ethan approaching, his presence steady and unwavering, like a mountain standing firm against the wind. He sat beside her, saying nothing for a few moments, simply sharing the quiet. "You look exhausted," he finally broke the silence, his voice warm and deep, like aged wine. Aria let out a dry, weary chuckle. Exhausted is an understatement. But Samuel is getting better, and that's all that matters. Ethan nodded, his gaze gentle, like moonlight filtering through leaves. "And you? How are you holding up?" She turned to him, studying his face under the dim glow of the hospital lights, the sharp angles, the deep gray eyes filled with genuine concern. He had always been this way, always caring for her in ways she hadn't noticed before. And in that moment, an invisible wall within her crumbled. She no longer fought her feelings, no longer built barriers to protect a heart too weary from past wounds. Ethan Carter, somehow, had become an irreplaceable part of her life, like the air she breathed, like the light at the end of a long tunnel. She wanted him. And for the first time, she didn't run from that desire. She leaned toward him, just slightly, like a flower tilting in the wind, testing whether he would pull away. But Ethan didn't move. He simply waited, patient as someone who had known this moment was inevitable, like a prophet quietly reading the signs of fate. Aria closed her eyes, and then she kissed him, a soft, hesitant kiss, like the first step on fragile ice. But when Ethan responded, everything suddenly became clear, like a painting finally coming together after scattered brushstrokes. He cradled her face in his hands, firm yet tender, deepening the kiss, pulling her closer. It was the warmth of a fire on a winter night, the safety of a harbor in a raging sea, something Aria hadn't realized she had been yearning for until it was right in front of her. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling in the quiet night. "Does this mean you'll stop running?" he asked, his tone teasing, but his eyes serious. Aria smiled, a small yet radiant smile, like the first light of dawn. "I think so." He traced her cheek lightly, his touch reverent, like an artist brushing against a cherished canvas. And in his stormy gray eyes, she saw something new, a depth of sincerity, a silent promise that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, Aria finally accepted a truth she had long avoided: she had fallen for Ethan Carter. Fallen for him with a heart that had been scarred and hardened by life's trials. She didn't know how long she sat there, feeling his warmth close, his kiss still lingering on her lips like an unshakable imprint. Her heart pounded in her chest, as if it wanted to burst free and announce its revelation to the world. She wanted to hold on to this moment, to understand how she had arrived here, from an awkward, mistaken hug at the airport to a love so deep it couldn't be denied. But at the same time, she didn't want to overthink it. For the first time, she just wanted to feel. Ethan tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his eyes glimmering like the starlit sky above. "Will you regret this tomorrow?" he asked, his voice a whisper in the night, yet carrying the weight of something profound. Aria felt her lips curve into a playful smile. "I think I've passed the point of regret, Ethan Carter." He smiled back, but behind it was a gravity that made her heart tremble. "So, does this mean you'll give me a chance?" She exhaled, looking down at her hands, overwhelmed by the conflicting emotions inside her, a part of her wanting to dive into him like a crashing wave, another part still scarred by the past, hesitant and afraid. "I don't know how to do this, Ethan," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, fragile as a falling leaf. "I've never." He took her hand, enveloping it in both of his, not rushing, not pressuring, just holding it, like a steady presence waiting for her to take the step when she was ready. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, his eyes shining with quiet conviction. Aria looked at him, and in that instant, she realized she had never wanted to try anything more than she wanted to try with him, to step onto this uncertain path, no matter how rough or breathtaking it might be. The days that followed moved to a new rhythm, like a melody both unfamiliar and comforting. After the kiss at the hospital, nothing was the same. Ethan remained by her side, not only helping Samuel recover, making sure he had the right medication, bringing him small comforts he enjoyed, but also being there for her. Aria felt it in the way he looked at her, in the fleeting touches that reminded her she wasn't alone. Their conversations grew lighter, like spring breezes instead of summer storms. Their glances burned deeper, like a steady flame that needed no words. Their goodbyes stretched longer, as if neither of them wanted to let go. Finally, the day arrived for Samuel to be discharged, bringing relief and joy as bright as sunlight after a long stretch of rain. But it was also the day Aria had to face reality. The restaurant now bore her name, standing there like an old dream resurrected, waiting for her to decide its fate. And, of course, Ethan was beside her as she stepped inside for the first time in years, the scent of aged wood, the walls weathered but rich with memories, the whispers of the past brushing against her ears. He stood there, not pushing, not rushing, only watching with hope in his eyes. Aria took a deep breath, feeling her heart pound. She knew, this wasn't just about a restaurant. It was about a new beginning, with Ethan, with Samuel, and with herself. For the first time since the restaurant closed, Aria stepped into the space, feeling as though she were returning to an old home after years of separation. The faint scent of aged wood mixed with memories, wrapping around her like a gentle embrace from the past. She ran her fingers across the dust-covered table draped in a faded bedsheet. Every corner of the room felt like a fragment of her childhood, days spent gathered with family, her father's laughter echoing from the kitchen, her mother's eyes gleaming as she wiped the tables with her calloused hands. Life had once been so simple, like a soothing melody amidst the chaos of the world. Ethan stood silently behind her, respecting this sacred moment, his gaze that of a traveler admiring a priceless painting. She turned to him, offering a smile, warmth spreading through her chest like the first rays of spring sunlight. "I want to reopen this place," she said, her voice steady, as if making a vow. Ethan nodded, as though he had already read her thoughts. "Then let's make it happen." "We?" She blinked, surprise mingling with doubt. He shrugged, arms crossed, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "I know a thing or two about business. Maybe I can help." Aria narrowed her eyes, scrutinizing him like a detective sizing up a suspect. Are you trying to become my business partner, Carter? Ethan stepped closer, his laughter ringing through the quiet space like a joyful melody. Maybe I just want an excuse to stay close to you. Her heart stuttered, fluttering like a caged bird set free. You don't need an excuse, she blurted out before she could stop herself. And when she saw the light in his eyes, she knew there was no turning back. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her closer, warmer, like a safe harbor in the midst of a storm. Then I guess I've finally found where I belong. Aria smiled, radiant as the sunrise after a long night. The restaurant would reopen. Samuel was safe. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to embrace happiness without fear, without the ghosts of doubt lurking, without the anxiety that tomorrow might steal away today's joy. But fate, like a masterful director with a penchant for unexpected twists, had one more surprise in store for her. The next night, Ethan took her out to dinner, saying he wanted to celebrate. Yet Aria noticed something different about him. His usual confidence was tinged with a hint of nervousness, like an actor forgetting his lines before stepping onto the stage. The restaurant wasn't overly lavish, nor suffocating with rigid formalities. It was warm, intimate, a small corner of happiness. The soft glow of hanging lights, the scent of freshly baked bread, the gentle background music whispering like love itself. Midway through dinner, Ethan fumbled into his pocket and placed a small box on the table. Aria's heart stopped, suspended in the air. He took a deep breath and opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant ring, shimmering under the lights like a tiny star in the night sky. Aria, he began, his voice deep yet unsteady, like a man standing at the threshold of something life-changing. I've never been one to follow rules. I'm not great at expressing emotions, you know that, don't you? But you changed everything. I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and overwhelming like a crashing wave. Are you proposing to me? She stammered, half laughing, half crying. He took her hand, his warmth steady and firm, as if afraid she might slip away. Not because it's too soon. Not because it makes sense. But because I know, it's you. I want you. Always. Ethan had always challenged her, always pushed her beyond her comfort zone like a fierce wind pulling her from familiar shores. But now, he wasn't asking her to do the impossible, he was simply asking her to accept happiness. To accept him as an inseparable part of her life. She smiled, letting the tears fall freely like spring rain, and answered with one word. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. Only certainty, as clear as sunlight breaking through the clouds. Ethan laughed, his joy echoing like a triumphant symphony. He slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a kiss, a deep, lingering kiss full of promises, binding them like an unspoken vow between two souls who had found each other through the storm. The restaurant would reopen. They were together. And at last, fate had smiled upon them. Aria still couldn't believe what had happened the night before. Ethan Carter, the man who had upended her life from that accidental, amusing airport hug, the man who had made her heart race, break, and heal again, had proposed to her. And she had said yes. Without hesitation. Without fear. Just with the absolute certainty that this was where she belonged. After years of running from love, doubting every glance, holding herself back to avoid new wounds, she had finally found someone worth risking it all for, a man who wasn't perfect, but was so fiercely genuine that she wanted to believe in things she thought she had lost. But saying yes to Ethan wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of a new, chaotic, and dazzling chapter. The next morning, her tiny apartment turned into an emotional battleground. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, and the first call was from Samuel, his voice panicked as though he'd just heard his sister was about to skydive without a parachute. You got engaged to Ethan Carter? Are you sure? He's not your usual type, you know. Samuel had always been her little knight in shining armor, and it took all her persuasive skills to convince him that this wasn't some reckless mistake. "Relax, I know what I'm doing," she laughed, though even she felt a slight tremor at saying it out loud. Then the restaurant became her universe. Renovations were in full swing, a symphony of activity, the hammering of nails, the swish of paintbrushes, the chatter of workers filling the space. Aria threw herself into the work with a passion she had never felt before, determined to create not just a perfect restoration of the past but a fresh start for the future. Ethan, true to his word, stayed by her side. And his involvement genuinely surprised her. A man accustomed to luxury penthouses and million-dollar deals was now choosing rustic wooden tables, sitting through meetings with food suppliers, and, most amusingly, struggling to wear an apron as he attempted to bake alongside her. She couldn't contain her laughter whenever she saw him, flour-dusted and exasperated, looking more like a clumsy clown than a businessman. "Cooking is way harder than it looks, who would have thought," he grumbled, scowling at a failed attempt. But what touched her most was his patience. He didn't try to take control, didn't impose his own vision on her dream. He simply stayed, quietly supporting her, like a true partner, not a billionaire, but a man willing to learn how to hold a frying pan just to make her smile. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the newly installed windows, Ethan stood beside her, wooden spoon in hand, looking hilariously unimpressed after burning his first attempt at soup. "You know," he mused, "I could buy an entire restaurant chain, but doing this with you is way more fun." Aria tilted her head, teasing him. "So you admit you're terrible at cooking?" He chuckled, pulling her close. "Only when you're here to save me." But as life often proves, not everything is a bed of roses. News of their engagement exploded across the media like a dazzling bomb against a quiet sky. Within hours, tabloids and gossip sites had unearthed every possible angle. Who is Aria? What does Ethan Carter see in this ordinary girl? Will this love story last until winter? And then, like a venomous snake refusing to let go, Abigail, Ethan's ex-girlfriend, entered the fray. She gave an interview, her voice sugar-coated but laced with ice, hinting that Aria was nothing more than a clever gold digger, that Ethan had been blinded by a fleeting infatuation, and that their relationship would dissolve like seafoam before long. Aria tried to block out the toxic whispers, but they buzzed in her mind like an endless swarm of bees. She felt like a bird trapped in a glass cage, scrutinized by the entire world with no way to escape. Ethan noticed something was wrong the moment he walked into the restaurant late that night. Aria sat alone in the quiet space, the dim golden light casting soft shadows across her face, her tired eyes glued to her phone as if staring into an abyss. "Are you okay?" he asked, his deep, warm voice like a soothing cup of tea on a winter night. She hesitated, pressing her lips together before exhaling a slow sigh. "I'm trying." Ethan sat beside her, gently taking the phone from her hands and skimming through the harsh headlines without flinching. "All of this," she continued, her voice fragile, like a dry leaf caught in the wind. "It feels like I've lost control of my own life. I used to be just a normal girl, trying to get by. Now, I'm Ethan Carter's fiancée, and to the rest of the world, that means I'm no longer myself." Ethan was silent for a moment, as if weighing every word she had just spoken. Then he turned to her, his gaze steady, deep, like a still lake hiding unspoken depths. "I'm still me. And you're still you. Those people don't know you, they only see what they want to see, the stories they create to fill their pages." She looked at him, her eyes flickering between doubt and hope. "And what do you see?" He smiled, a lopsided grin that was both tender and teasing, like sunlight breaking through the clouds. "I see the girl who mistakenly hugged me at the airport and turned my world upside down. And I've never been more grateful for a mistake in my life." Aria laughed, a pure, unrestrained sound that cut through the weight on her shoulders. "I feel the same way," she murmured, a surprising lightness settling in her chest. Ethan took her hand, pressing a soft kiss to her trembling fingers. "Let me handle this." She frowned, a flicker of stubbornness in her voice. "Ethan, I don't need you to fix my problems." "I know," he replied, his gaze unwavering in its sincerity. "But sometimes, letting someone help you doesn't mean you're weak. It means you trust them." Aria stilled, realizing he was right. She had spent so many years carrying burdens alone, building walls around her heart so high that she had forgotten, accepting help could also be a kind of strength. The strength of connection. The strength of love. The next day, Ethan did what he did best, he took control. He held an exclusive interview, standing like a knight with his shield raised, protecting the woman he loved. He told their story, the fateful airport hug, the unexpected days spent cooking in his extravagant kitchen, the moment he gave her back her family's restaurant. He was open, sincere, and completely unpolished. And when he said, "Aria is the love of my life," his voice was as steady as a mountain in a storm, leaving no room for the tabloids to twist his words. But the real turning point came when Abigail arrived at a major event Ethan was attending. She was stunning, poised like a queen, but Ethan ignored her completely. Not a glance. Not a greeting. For the first time, the woman who had always believed she controlled the narrative realized she had been erased from his story. And for the first time, Aria felt that chapter had truly closed, leaving a blank, untouched page for her and Ethan to write together. A week later, the restaurant was ready, a dream awakened, rebuilt with sweat and love. Opening night was a symphony of emotions. Samuel stood beside her, still recovering but glowing with pride as he helped coordinate the chaos. Ethan watched from a distance, his quiet presence unwavering, letting his woman shine in the spotlight. And when the doors finally opened, when the first guests walked in, bringing laughter and warm congratulations, Aria felt tears well up, not from sorrow, but from a joy so full it felt like sunlight after a long storm. She had done it. The restaurant had risen from the ashes, like a phoenix reborn. And more than that, she was living a happiness that was real. That night, after hours of work, Ethan led her to the restaurant's balcony, where the city lights sparkled beneath them like scattered stars. He looked into her eyes, his gray gaze so deep it could drown her. "I told you this would be a good investment," he said. Aria smirked, mischief dancing in her expression. "You mean the restaurant? Or me?" Ethan laughed, the sound warm and rich, like a melody she wanted to hear forever. "Both." She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Ethan cupped her face with both hands, his thumb grazing her cheek as if she were a masterpiece he never wanted to stop admiring. "Now that you're here, tell me, what do you want?" She didn't hesitate. "You. I want you, Ethan." He smiled, pulling her into a kiss that tasted like forever. And in that moment, Aria knew, she had found her safe harbor in the middle of life's endless storm. Time flew like a passing breeze after she said yes. The restaurant became exactly what she had envisioned, the scent of fresh bread, the hum of happy customers, the warmth of a place that felt like home. Samuel was healthy. Happy. His laughter was the sunlight piercing through the clouds. And Ethan, he was still there. The missing piece she never realized she had been searching for. But as the wedding approached, Aria often found herself lost in thought, reflecting on this incredible journey. How had one mistaken hug at an airport led her here, from an ordinary girl with a guarded heart to a woman standing on the brink of forever? Wedding planning began almost immediately, and Aria quickly realized, it was chaos. While Ethan remained cool as ever, willing to nod along to every one of her decisions, she found herself drowning in an ocean of choices. Invitations. Dress fittings. Menus. Flowers. It felt like a storm of endless decisions. "I never thought planning a wedding would be this hard," she groaned, collapsing onto Ethan's couch, surrounded by wedding magazines strewn across the floor like battlefield debris. Ethan chuckled, picking up a magazine with curiosity. "You know, we could elope. No fuss. No pressure." Aria side-eyed him. And risk Samuel murdering me for not inviting him? Ethan winced dramatically. Yeah, okay. He might chase me with a broom. She laughed, shaking her head. But if it gets too overwhelming, let me help, he said, his voice softer now, filled with quiet devotion. She took his hand, feeling his warmth, his steady presence. You already are. Just by being here. He squeezed her fingers. I just want this day to be perfect for you. And Aria knew, with Ethan by her side, it already was. Aria laughed, her clear laughter ringing like wind chimes on a spring day as she thought about the ceremony about to take place. It was set in an outdoor garden where nature embraced them with vibrant blooms, deep red roses, pure white carnations, and ivy vines weaving intricate patterns like the strokes of a masterful artist. Strings of lights floated overhead, twinkling softly like fallen stars, casting a magical glow over everything, as if the whole world was holding its breath, awaiting the sacred moment. Aria stepped down the aisle, her soft shoes gliding over the lush green grass, feeling the weight of the guests' gazes converging on her like sunlight through a magnifying glass. But amid all those eyes, she only saw Ethan, the man standing at the altar, clad in a perfectly tailored suit that fit him like royal attire, his radiant smile brimming with love, outshining even the shimmering lights around them. As she drew closer, Ethan took her hand, his grasp warm and steady like a safe harbor amidst the sea. You look breathtaking, he whispered, his deep voice a soothing melody. Aria smiled, her heart pounding wildly, as if ready to burst free, like a small bird taking its first flight. The officiant began to speak, his voice steady, but she barely heard him, every sound seemed to dissolve, leaving only the man before her, the one who had upended her world in ways she never dared to dream. Aria, do you take Ethan to be your husband, to love and honor him for the rest of your life? She looked up, drowning in his deep gray eyes, feeling a certainty rise within her like a summer tide. I do, she answered, her voice as clear as a mountain stream. Ethan, do you take Aria to be your wife, to love and honor her for the rest of your life? Ethan's smile widened, shining like the midday sun. I do, forever. Their kiss was a timeless seal, affirming the vows they had just spoken, sweet and intense, like a symphony reaching its crescendo. Applause and cheers erupted from friends and family, crashing over them like an ocean wave, yet Aria only felt Ethan, his hand gently cradling her face, his warmth spreading like a fire on a winter's night. In that moment, she knew she had found her true home, not a place, but a person, a heart beating in sync with her own. The reception that followed was a celebration woven with laughter and joy, a vivid masterpiece painted in the brightest hues. Long tables draped in pristine white cloth were laden with fragrant dishes, golden toasted bread, richly roasted meats, and glasses of red wine that shimmered like the essence of happiness itself. Samuel stepped up to the microphone, looking both nervous and proud, his speech so heartfelt that the room fell into rapt silence. I've never seen my sister this happy, he said, his eyes twinkling as he looked at Aria. Ethan isn't just gaining an incredible wife today, he's also getting a slightly annoying younger brother like me. The guests burst into laughter, and Ethan, ever the good sport, stood up and quipped, I never wanted a little brother, but for Samuel, I'll make an exception, so long as he doesn't borrow my car too often. More laughter rippled through the room, warm as a spring breeze sweeping across a field. They danced deep into the night, their steps gliding across the wooden floor like destiny itself had choreographed their movements. Aria rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat harmonizing with the music, while Samuel twirled around nearby with a fellow doctor, his grin brighter than the grand chandelier above them. Toasts rang out endlessly, glasses clinking like a celebratory melody, marking the beginning of a new journey, one where love would be their guiding light. As the night waned and guests began to depart, Ethan pulled Aria into a quiet corner, holding her close as if he never wanted to let go. You're officially my wife now, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, like a man who had finally found his greatest treasure. Aria smiled, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, a lullaby just for her. And you're officially my husband. Ethan leaned in, pressing a gentle yet profound kiss to her lips, a promise that needed no words. Thank you for changing my life, she whispered, her eyes glistening with love and gratitude. He gazed at her, his gray eyes glowing like the sky after a cleansing rain. You've changed mine too, Aria. And no matter what the future holds, we'll face it together, just as we always have, ever since that fateful, mistaken embrace. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, as time seemed to pause around them, both knowing that this was not just a perfect ending, but the beginning of a much greater story, one that belonged solely to them. But their story did not end there, for life is a book with unwritten pages. After the wedding, Aria and Ethan stepped into married life with a rhythm that was both new and familiar. The restaurant remained the heart of their world, where Aria continued crafting new dishes with passion, and Ethan, ever the charmingly clumsy husband, occasionally wielded a wooden spoon only to burn a few soups, just to make her laugh. Samuel, healthier than ever, frequently stopped by, bringing hospital stories and endless teasing for his newly wedded brother-in-law. You know, he once said on a lazy afternoon, Ethan may be a billionaire, but he's absolutely terrible at chopping onions. You should teach him, Aria. She laughed, glancing at Ethan, who was mock scowling in protest. He has other talents, Ollie. Like making me laugh every single day. One evening, as the golden sunset bathed their backyard in a warm glow, Aria sat on the porch swing, Ethan beside her, a cup of coffee in hand. She leaned against him, savoring the rare moment of tranquility amidst life's bustling rhythm. Did you ever think we'd end up here? She asked, her voice dreamy, as if reminiscing a beautiful dream. Ethan turned to her, setting his coffee down, pulling her into his embrace. I didn't know for sure, but from the moment we had that mistaken hug at the airport, I had a feeling you were something special, one mistake I never wanted to correct. She smiled, wrapping her arms around him. So we were right to let fate lead the way. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, his voice a warm promise. Fate, or just you, the woman who made me believe in things I never dared to dream.